Good morning, everybody that's joining us. We're just going to give everybody a few minutes to pile into the webinar. If you can hear us and see us okay, just pop something in the chat. Tell us where you're joining us from this morning. We've got a raised hand already. Thank you, Eamon. Hope everybody else can hear me okay. We'll just give it until 1 minute past. Excuse me, to let everybody come into to the room. But thank you for joining us this morning. We've got a really interesting session for you this morning. Thank you, everyone, for the comments. At least you can hear us. That's a good start. So give everybody 30 more seconds. We've got London, Southeast. We've got Eamon and Lindsay at Towers and Gornal. I think they're somewhere up north. So I hope it's useful for everybody. Right, we will make a start. There will be others that will continue to pour in, but thank you again for joining us this morning. We're going to be talking about best practices for standardizing critical processes in your accounting firm. I'm just going to get control of Peter's screen here. Okay. Got it. Right. So for those that don't know me, my name is Will Farnell. I'm founder at Farnell Clark and co-founder at App Advisory Plus. I'm delighted to be joined by Peter Goodett from Carbon and Peter Jarman from PJCO this morning. Peter G, should we come to you first? Do you want to just give a quick introduction so everybody knows who you are?
Cool, perfect. Yeah, so I'm Peter. I currently work at Carbon as a senior customer success manager. And I've also worked in practice where I was the head of operations for some time at a firm of about 50 people, scaling it from, I was the fifth or sixth person to join, and then kind of scaled it to about 25, 26 people in about 18 months, then came back to get it from 35 people to 50 people. So I've got kind of different bits of experience that might be relevant here.
Excellent. Look forward to your input as we go through. And Peter J, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm founder and managing partner of PJCO. We're a firm of chartered certified accountants based down near Brighton on the south coast. We've grown very slowly to 25 employees over the last 30 years, but we do have ambition now to go from 25 to 50 over the next 3 to 5 years. So that scaling is where we're at the moment. I feel a bit of a fraud being here, only at 25 employees over 30 years.
Not at all. I'm sure some of those have ramped up over the recent last few years, Peter. But we'll talk a bit about that as we go through. So housekeeping and everything else for everybody. This is scheduled for about 45 minutes. So I will do my very best to have you away by 10:45. Do jump in with questions, pop those in the Q&A box for us. Any chat comments, observations, share those in the chat box. Rowan is sitting in the background and will answer questions that he can as they come in, but equally we'll put questions to the two Peters, and of course I'm happy to field questions myself if there's things that you think I can help with. So the plan for the next 40 minutes or so, we've just done introductions. We're going to kick off really with a very brief conversation around the importance of process as you grow and scale an accounting firm, and also the difference between growth and scale. Certainly in a LinkedIn post that I put up talking about this webinar, it was the key point for me, and I think it's really important. So we'll have a brief conversation with the two Peters around that. Peter G is then going to take us through some of the best practice that Carbon find. What I love about what Carbon do is they do a huge amount of research into what accounting firms are doing around the world, and they do a really good job of putting that into really valuable content. And Peter's going to take us through some of the process best practice in terms of the way that Carbon work with accounting firms to help them develop and build process, and how Carbon as a tool kind of underpins that process mapping, and provides the controls and mechanisms to enable firms to effectively use that process. And then we're going to have some time for discussion and questions at the end of that session. So that's the plan. I will let Peter take back control of his screen for when he needs it. But so on this point of growth versus scale, I've said on a number of occasions that it's really easy to grow an accounting firm if you have the right message and you communicate that message really effectively. Clients will come. It really isn't difficult to get clients coming to you, and as long as your offer's right, signing new clients up, and that grows your revenue. The challenge is, and certainly from first-hand experience, as I was growing Farnell Clark in the early years, we've averaged about 30% year-on-year growth for the last 13 years, which is great, but it's also really painful. And in the earlier years, that number was much bigger. And what tended to happen at the height of our growth in terms of client numbers compared to our headcount, around 8 staff, we were taking on a client a day effectively in terms of new business. And very quickly, it becomes easy to start dropping the ball. Particularly with onboarding, as a fine example, when you're onboarding that number of clients, it gets really tricky to keep on top of it. And what we do naturally as accountants is we focus on the client. So all of our effort, attention is focused on making sure the client's happy. And that means we neglect what's going on internally within our business. In 2015, we had to rebuild our accounting firm almost from the bottom up, because for so long we'd focused on making sure we were doing the best we could for clients, but we neglected the fact that we'd got to 25, 30 staff in our organization, and we didn't do performance management, and we didn't really do fee reviews, and we didn't really have a consistent process to how we prepared accounts and VAT returns. So we almost imploded and had to kind of restart and start from the bottom up and look at what we were doing. And we rebuilt our firm. And I'm guessing that there could well be people that are either on the call today or are watching the recording and think, you know what, I kind of completely relate to that. That's kind of where I am at the moment. I could be wrong, but Peter J, does this resonate with you in terms of your firm?
Absolutely, Will. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in saying that, you know, anyone that's okay at accounts can start to get clients, and because you're okay at accounts, you get new clients, you get more and more new clients, and as that starts to grow, you tend to get worse and worse at looking after those clients as well, unless you can really scale. So you end up getting all these clients in because people recommend you because you're really good, and then you start to get busier and busier, and as you're running on that hamster wheel, you just can't cope with everything. And actually what you wanted to do is go back to the start and build a system, build a process that would be able to cope with those in the first place. And I think, you know, if I could go back 30 years, I'd have started with my system straight away on day one, rather than just getting in new clients from day one.
Yeah, and it's really easy, because when you start an accounting firm, you focus on what's important, and it's revenue through the door, isn't it? And it's like, but we've got to get clients, we've got to win clients, and that's your focus. But I think some things you've said there is it's recognizing that there's a difference in a mindset of running an accounting practice and a mindset of running an accounting business, and I think that's the point, isn't it? That if you want to scale, you've got to think in terms of a business rather than a practice.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things. You actually decide and say, we are an accountancy business from now on. You know, we're a business and we just happen to be selling accountancy services. And when you've got that in your head, it's quite easy then to start to think about the processes and the systems to make that accountancy business work.
Yeah, absolutely. And Peter G, you before you joined Carbon, you worked in an accounting firm that grew quickly. Again, does this resonate with some of the challenges that you had in that firm?
Yeah, very much so. I think as Peter was speaking, I was just thinking about how we were kind of hiring, and we were doing that out of, you know, to some extent desperation, because we had so much clients coming in. We just had to get someone on board quickly, and that person would come in and they would have a bit of experience, whether it be on like statutory accounts or payroll or VAT, and they would instinctively just say, look, I need to get work over the line, and they'll fall into their process. But that might not necessarily be how we want to deliver, maybe not to the same speed or standard or what have you, but we just appreciated they were there to help. And then, of course, as both of you kind of said, like, we got to a point where we realized actually we need to be all kind of in sync here and working to the same standard, or at least a similar standard, so the clients have a good expectation of what to expect if they move between team members, or if we bring on new juniors, there's something for them to aspire to, and it's clear what that is. So it's just bringing back lots of memories of you guys bouncing around these points. But yeah,
absolutely. So I think the point here that I wanted to get across here is that scaling is really being able to grow profitably, sustainably, and effectively. And I think that's the point that I wanted to get across, in terms of it's easy for us to grow, but it's much harder for us to scale, which is deliver that growth in a profitable, sustainable way. And the work that I do when I'm helping other accounting firms now is that I look at what went wrong for me, and the focus is, look, we've got to get your systems, your processes in place from day one, so that you're ready to tackle that growth as it starts to happen. So I hope that kind of sets the scene nicely, because where we're going with this now really is that I made the point that I really like what Carbon do in terms of looking at what's going on globally in accounting firms and thinking about how we take best practice. And Peter's going to take us through some stuff around thinking about the importance of establishing processes and how we look to embed those in our firm to enable us this sustainable growth within our business. So Peter, I'm going to hand over to you to run through this part of the session.
Oh, sure, perfect. Okay, so I should probably before diving in say that, just to reiterate what Will said, this presentation is actually an adaptation of one that was built by our COO and head of customer success, Ian Vason, and he's got a much longer version of this presentation, which I'd recommend. And that comes off the back of him scaling companies like Xero and Intuit and stuff like that, where he's had the opportunity to speak to lots of accountancy firms over the years. And then, of course, like, I've kind of mixed in my background as well. So hopefully it's going to be a world of use, but there's also more behind it. So if you want to dig in, I'll share a link later on, or I'll get Rowan to share a link afterwards. But that being said, here's what I'm going to kind of go through at a high level. I'm going to go at some pace to try and keep to time. So please forgive me if I've gone over something really quickly, and Rowan, feel free to interrupt if there's a question that comes in and I need to clarify anything. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about discovering what processes we need to look at and how we might prioritize them, then looking at those processes and trying to make sure we understand them so we can optimize them, and then going through the stage of what we refer to as reinventing, to kind of make sure that they're in line with how we want things to be. And then we're going to look at how we might roll those out across the practice, some of the implications of that, and then look at how automation may or may not help. I think there's a very much an inclination from all the clients I'm speaking to at the moment that automation is always the answer, but in some cases it can be a challenge. And I think that that's why I kind of started off here with this quote from Bill Gates, where he says, the first rule of any technology used in a business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency. The second rule, that automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency. And I say this because there's always a rush to get into that new tool. There's a rush to build that new process and just destroy what was there before. But sometimes if you haven't kind of thought it through and you haven't had a chance to test it, you can build in redundancy, and then that becomes a battle that you've got to fight later on down the line. And unfortunately, sometimes those dragons get really large. So keep that in mind. So keep that in mind as we go through the presentation, but also as you're designing and building those processes in your business. So we're going to look at 10 steps that we kind of recommend, typically kicking off with that kind of discovery phase that I mentioned earlier. What we do typically get people to do is determine the processes that they need to optimize, discuss those, and then essentially agree what success might look like. Are you trying to reduce client-facing errors? Are you trying to save time? Are you trying to make sure that you've got a process that you can train junior team members on and get them efficient really quickly? These decisions have quite distinct ramifications. So definitely kind of take the time to figure out what you're trying to do first. And of course, to some extent, you're going to want a mixture of the three. But then at that stage, then you can start to map out what your processes are today, discuss the variances in them, because you might have clients that are large or smaller, or just introduce some complexity at random stages, and then review those steps to kind of work out why they're inefficient and what you might want to do about them. And at that point, we would say kind of create the new process, design it, ideally with team members who are going to be doing that process. And then after that, then you go and test it. So you put it into your workflow solution and what have you, and then you can kind of iterate off the back of that. So just to kind of look at a little bit more detail on what that discovery process is like, typically we would recommend determining first who owns this. And this is something that is often overlooked, particularly if you're a smaller firm, where you might not have the additional resource of someone like me as an ops manager or something like that. You really do need someone to take charge of it, whether it be the office manager, the CEO, or what have you. And they need to say, look, this is a clear priority for the business, and other things will get pushed to a side. And then equally, you might have a champion or someone who's leading for particular workflows. I'd highly recommend starting off there. And then that person and a couple of supporting people might start gathering information and designing a hypothesis of what you want to achieve with that workflow, writing down those high-level details, and then conducting a session with the wider team. You know, how can we kind of make this better? What are you doing behind the scenes that we don't know about? Has anyone spotted issues that come up regularly? What can we do about those? And then documenting this list of steps that kind of come off the back of that as a process. And then equally looking at the time, all the resources absorbed by that activities, in the activities at each of those steps. And then you can map out the critical path for rolling that out. So there's clarity on what you're doing. And this is a replicable process across all processes, be they internally, client facing. So it's something that you can push through, and as that person who's at that project owner can just make sure that those junior team members are doing as well. So this is a really good path to manage that. And off the back of that, you should end up with something that looks something akin to this, where you've got a list of the processes you have across the business. And then equally, you've got a way to kind of think about those. So you can identify which ones are the most efficient, which are the most bothersome, which are the biggest opportunities. And then of course, ending up with, you know, we're going to go with these 3 processes to prioritize and get through. And ideally, you know, once that's filled out, it'll be somewhat obvious what you need to deal with. So we're looking at this kind of write-up. We can see payrolls come up a number of times. It's the most bothersome. It's got a big opportunity to get right, because when you think about payroll being done monthly across a number of clients, then that might be, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 times bigger than something like, let's say, annual accounts, for example, across the business. And it also associated with revenue, in that if you get payroll wrong, typically that client's going to want to leave. So you want to get that right, and having that priority clearly displayed across the business. Everyone knows, look, payroll is what we're going for, guys and girls. So then we can start to look at, you know, what does that process actually look like? What's happening behind the scenes? How are people actually getting this done? And at this point, you really want to storyboard that. You want it to be super clear. You want it to be obvious that this is the step that happens after that. This is where certain people are doing something slightly different. And mapping that out should look something like this. Even if it's just a sketch on the back of a notepad, that's fine. You don't have to have like software to solve this, but just having the clarity is what we're after. And having that process map, basically, also, I should probably point this out, I put this intentionally to say that when you're working with more senior team members, what I've often found is there's a lot of assumption that comes in, that this more senior team member just assumes that everyone knows how to do this thing and it's done in this particular way. But you need to be writing out these process maps as though it's being done for a junior. And that's crucial, partly because when you're building the training, but also it provides a bit of clarity for every team member that, yeah, we have really got down every step here. And actually, although I've been doing this for 20 years and I know to just click here, someone who's new to this might not know that, and leaving that step out leaves that person in the woods. And that happens a lot, particularly when you're working remotely. You also want to think about reporting in the high level stages. So when you're looking more granularly here, you can see those consecutive steps and that level of detail, but actually when you're reporting, you probably don't need that level of detail. Someone who's managing the team probably needs a specific type of overview with clear descriptions of what's gone on, and then they can dive in and look at that later. And getting that process mapped to these stages is super useful for providing clarity across the business of how well we're doing at each stage of whether it be the month, quarter, or year. So definitely kind of take that into account. So once you've got those mapped out and you have an understanding of what's going on, now we can start to look at, well, where are the opportunities specifically? What's breaking, and you can get that off the back of client feedback. You can speak to the team internally, see what they're most frustrated about. Where does the work seem to pause? So for example, we had like a lot of tax work hit a certain stage, and then it would just be there for 3, 4, 5, 6 months because we had that deadline stretched over a long period of time. It looked as though that was acceptable, but having an opportunity to look at the map made us think, actually, that gets in the way of other tax work. So we're going to pop that in and say, look, although we've got deadlines that can last like 6, 7 months, whatever it is, we're really going to address that because that matters to our business. And then we've done that. We got to that stage because we could see how the mapping out was actually going to affect not just this workflow, but others. So definitely get that detail. And then you'll end up with ideally something like this. So looking at keeping that topic of payroll, we can see like where it was the most efficient. So we can see that the payroll team in our team, as one of the examples, is the team were blindingly fast at using the payroll software that we had. It was unbelievable how quickly they navigated through it. So we knew we wanted to stick with that. And we also knew that payroll was obviously most effectively done when the team member knew the client inside out. So it's not just that they knew our payroll process, but they knew the nuances of that particular client, when they would respond, how they would respond, what kind of information would come through and what they would have to chase for. And that obviously is not something necessarily that you would know instinctively if the client's just been handed to you. So that's something we wanted visibility and clarity on. We also looked at when it was possible to strip back the process and have minimal set of steps, and that would obviously make it an efficient process. But equally, we had massive challenges with the payroll. So for example, payroll dates kicked off at different times in the month. Clients, a lot of time was eaten up chasing clients, like constantly sending those reminders emails, hey, please send us some more information. And then you end up with a stack of 30, 40 emails with different bits of information in it, and that was a bit of a mess as well. And then equally PAYE reminders, where some clients felt it was our responsibility to remind them of that, and some team members felt, well, it's your responsibility and you know that comes up every month. And we needed some clarity on that. So when we thought about what we were going to do next and how we were going to make some changes in the business, we looked at how can we keep the dates visible and up to date automatically, and then how could we work on getting some good handover notes and simplifying reportings for when we needed to do those handovers. And at that point when we kind of started building out a new process and getting the team involved, and that would be an ongoing conversation. It wasn't just simply one session for us. It was, okay, we went away, had to think about it, came together, discussed what we thought might work. Then we went away, had to think about that, and then came back. And then we kind of reimagined what that new payroll process would look like. So we mapped that out, we thought about the stages, and then that gave us an opportunity to start thinking about delivering it. And so kind of putting that logic together in that process meant, okay, well, how are we actually going to get the team to use that? And obviously that's a mixture of training, getting new checklists in place, having those checklists accessible and actually manageable, maintainable. And then based off the back of those learnings, we looked at iterating. So some of the learnings that kind of came off the back of that is when we mapped out the process correctly, it flowed quite well into actually building the workflow and the statuses. So we had the clear stages, what needed to be done, whose responsibility it was, and then building a checklist off the back of that became super obvious. We also realized that when there are over a certain amount of tasks per status, it became unmanageable to track, rely on the team to keep up to date, and etc. So we kind of tried to keep the number of tasks needed to be done at each stage to a minimum and a clear responsibility. And then, of course, off the back of that, that meant team members could relate to where the work was just by glancing at the statuses. And just to iterate on that a bit deeper, when you're looking at on the left, kind of mapping that process, that should transition really nicely into actually building the workflow and checklists that people use to actually manage the work on a day-to-day. So I think at this point, to illustrate that and show that at a bit deeper level, it's a good opportunity to kind of dive into Carbon. And while I'm not going to be able to do a full demo of Carbon, we can obviously offer that to you at a later stage if you want to kind of give one of our team members a shout. You can do so or book one of our kind of webinars. But diving into Carbon itself, this is roughly what it looks like. It starts off with a triage, which is essentially your inbox, which has a mixture of emails, internal notifications and such. And then it has a to-do list for each team member. So then that comes off the back of the work, which I'm about to dive into. And then of course we have that kind of high level work. So going back to that payroll and thinking about the statuses, what you're looking at here is currently my payroll clients. But obviously I've got the opportunity to look at payroll in different ways. So if I search specifically, what I'm doing here is just searching through the dashboards that I've saved. And you can see that I've saved multiple payroll dashboards because I need different views at different times for different reasons. And going back to that point about having that clarity across the business of what was going on, it's now clear to us like what stage each piece of work is at. But equally, I can kind of dive down just to what I need to focus on by clicking on, I've saved it as a bookmark here in my dashboard. And I can see like, this is my set of clients. Unfortunately for me, I only have 2 clients that I do payroll for, which is obviously a blessing. I don't think there's going to be anyone else in the world that can claim that. But what we can now see is there's certain things that we've been able to achieve off the back of thinking about our workflow. So if I dive into this payroll work item, the way Carbon works, I probably should briefly describe this for a second. So when we have work items, we have the ability to attach communications to them. So you can see an email, a request for information has gone out to the client. That was automated. We can see some various stages that have changed throughout the rollout of this process. If I had a call with a client, I could have a note here. And again, keeping to that point about the visibility and understanding when work is handed over to a new team member, Carbon was incredibly powerful for achieving that. But even more so when we actually come into the tasks, what we can see here is Carbon allows us to push out an automated email at a certain time of the month dictated by us. And that task has gone out to the client. So that email that you saw earlier was essentially a request from information that went directly from Carbon with a to-do list item on it. So the client has gone in and they have actually ticked off that task. And then the status of the work changed automatically off the back of that to confirm information was received. So that ends up in a situation where, going back to if I was to look at my payroll dashboard, I see a piece of work here that says confirm information is received. I could even go a bit further in Carbon and say, look, I only really want to see work where it's in play that I need to actually touch. So I've got a dashboard here that just says the stages where I need to do stuff. So here again, going back into that confirm information is received, our team would then just have that dashboard ready at a certain time of the month, come in, and they would see very clearly what they need to do, confirm that the payroll information has been received and lock the tab for the month. So they could go in, see that payroll document for our client, and we'd have this all set up for each client. Obviously, we can go into the relevant month. So I believe you just tick on it. You could see that the information's come in. Then we'd ask the team member to lock the tab, and that would be all good. And then we come back to the task that needs to be done next, confirming that the client's paid that, sent that information across. And then our team member would go through and tick. And of course, the status of the work changes now to prep. And then they would work through that checklist that we've designed. And we would have in here loads of bits of information. So what you're looking at here is our template for our standard process. But actually what happened was once we got that template right and it was generic and it worked across clients, what our team would also do is start to add value by, and going back to that point about having the clarity of the nuances of the client, our team would add additional tasks. And what this was doing is it was building on our standard process, but allowed for that flexibility and the nuances that each client had. And of course, within these, we could have descriptions. We could have much like an email, you can basically have basic formatting, but you could also upload different assets or images. So maybe a screenshot of the online banking or the app that they use for e-commerce, for example, came up quite a few times. So having that clarity and that visibility, even though we have that standard process, but on the nuances of the client, was incredibly powerful for us. And that was one of the reasons we chose Carbon. But also when you're building out your standard operating procedures, you want to think about the reality of the client. Is there's going to be some nuance? So again, clicking through these, the different stages will be evident. So at a certain point, for example, things might go into review, and then the work will be handed over to that person, and then they'll power their way through it, and eventually getting to the final set of tasks, which once they tick off, the team member no longer needs to worry about, and they just know that at the end of the month, the PAYE reminder is going to be sent out by Carbon. So from our perspective, it was clarity on where the work is at every stage. We could jump into a dashboard that would show us where things are at. We would always feel confident that Carbon's pushed out the stuff because we've got the statuses there again. And then of course, at a certain point in the month, I would just say to the team, double check your PAYE dashboards, and they'd come in and they could see that who needs to be chased up. So that visibility, once we got the process right, and that of course became scalable because everyone knew what that payroll process was going forward. The consistency meant that we could train clients on what to expect from whichever team member we had. And it also meant that we could hand over clients to different team members. And going back to the point of kind of growth versus scaling, this gave us the insight of what we needed to train people on. It gave us the insight on what was a scalable process. And it also meant it was more enjoyable for the team going through the growth because they knew that they could rely on, sorry, I should probably take a drink here. They knew they could rely on the processes and systems we were building because the visibility was there, because it worked with multiple clients. And there was no secrets when they were handed a new client because all the notes were there and they could go back through Carbon and see the previous months of what had actually happened. So yeah, getting those processes standardized and into a tool, whether it be Carbon or something else, was a massive game changer. And I definitely encourage you to think about that. And of course, I've touched on that automation, but definitely kind of take time to think about that automation and what you're going to introduce and what you're going to prevent. So we looked at basically tasks that were very simple, seeing if we could get a system or a tool to do those. We also looked at volume. For me, going back to that Bill Gates quote, I wanted to make sure that if I was going to put some automation in, it was going to have a significant impact. So I would look at things like, particularly because my role, I had basically an issue tracker. So if an issue came in from a client or a team member, I could see how many times it came up throughout the year, how much time it wasted for how many team members. And then thinking about automating, I was like, look, I want to look for those high volume things because particularly in payroll, you can imagine if I can save each team member 15 minutes across a minimum of 10 clients across a team of 30 that were doing payroll, over the year, that would be a significant time saving. But equally, we needed to think about, so apologies on that. Equally, we needed to think about what impact it would have if it went wrong. So again, if I got that process wrong and I was adding an additional 15 minutes per person, per payroll, per month, obviously that cost could be quite significant. So don't take that for granted. I'd highly recommend looking into understanding the automation and looking for what's worth actually automating. And of course, just to wrap up, I've kind of skipped over that payroll too, but I just showed you the payroll process I showed you was the second version. I wanted to kind of wrap up by saying, efficiency isn't set and forget. It's something that's your responsibility as the leader of the business, but also it's the responsibility of everyone in the team. So that what I mean by that is constantly look for opportunities to improve. Don't think that, okay, we've set that process and it's fine, because things are changing. Your clients are evolving. Your client base is hopefully evolving. Your team members are growing and getting smarter. And obviously tools like ours, for example, we roll out new features every 3 weeks. So there's another opportunity to get better, smarter, more robust. So constantly think of this as a revolving opportunity and, maybe plan something quarterly or annually, biannually to look at those processes. And that essentially is how we kind of think about process mapping, process building and delivering. Hopefully that's made sense. And I would definitely recommend checking out the kind of deeper version of this presentation, which I'll ask Rowan to email out with the notes. And of course, on our site, there's loads more resources. We're really passionate about sharing this kind of information and content. So, you know, if you wanted to have a play about with Carbon, you can do that for free. But equally, we've got loads of training resources and things to learn from if you're not on Carbon currently. And finally, that kind of wraps up with the templates that you kind of saw us build the workout off the back of in Carbon. We have hundreds of those, literally. So if you head on over to carbonhq.com/templates, you can see templates from statutory accounts, payroll, VAT, based on the learnings we've had from working with thousands of clients. So I'd highly recommend tapping into that. And at that point, I'm probably dramatically over time, but happy to
not too
questions.
much. It was good. Thank you for that, Peter. So
Awesome.
I'm going to give you a moment to catch your breath and go to Peter. But your last slide there in terms of the best practice templates answered one of the questions really, which is the challenge with anyone moving to practice management solutions is it's kind of, how do we go from kind of where we are to where, for example, you showed there in terms of a very clearly defined payroll process or whatever it is with the checklist and everything else. So Peter, Jay, to you, I mean, how did you do that? Because you're a Carbon user. So how did you get from where you were, which a moment ago you said was kind of a bit like me, a bit chaotic and not really structured and planned. So how did you go from that to having the processes that you have now? What were the hardest processes to build? What were the challenges? How did you do it?
I think, well, first of all, we had to think about what we were trying to do. And when you look at an accountancy business, the biggest cost is staff costs. And the biggest area that you can make efficiencies is how efficient you can make the staff. We worked out that we were spending, our biggest cost solely was training other people to do things. And what we wanted to do, we got this idea that we wanted to learn something once, and then we wanted to duplicate it over and over again. So if we learned how to, for example, how to do a shared stock transfer, if we learned it once and we documented it down, we put the process in place, we could then duplicate that over and over again without it taking any more time of any of our senior staff or partners or anything like that. And it was trying to get that idea. We just want to learn something once and then duplicate it. Once we got that, then it was looking for ways of actually duplicating that down. And Carbon's a good way of doing that.
So did you use kind of the best practice templates, or did you work to kind of build your own process and build effectively a template for what you were doing? So it's always this challenge: do we let our processes drive the technology, or do we let the technology drive our processes?
Yeah, no,
I see the other Peter nodding here as well, so he's probably got something to add on that one too. Go on, Peter.
Which one?
You carry on.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, from us, it was a matter of we needed to decide exactly what we were doing. To be fair, I picked up something in one of your books, Will. We control the work, and we know exactly what we're going to offer and how we're going to offer it. So it was us deciding exactly what our processes were going to be and what we were going to offer the clients. And then once we got that, we just had to get them documented down. So we could have done this without Carbon, but Carbon made it much easier to document those things down and made it much easier for other people to follow it. There's lots of things Peter didn't mention there. For example, recording down little Loom videos as to processes. That works really well with, our firm is made up of basically everyone's come out of university or school, and is learning to become an accountant or learning to qualify. So having that information in video format, so someone can just go off and have a look at what I meant 5 years ago with saying how to do this stock transfer, seeing that in video format is really, really useful. But it starts with the firm. It doesn't start with the software.
Yeah. And Peter, do you agree? Do you agree with that comment?
Yeah, 100%. Almost copy and paste what Peter said there. Like, to give you an example of how powerful capturing the content was, I was responsible for training literally the whole team, which was 50 plus people, as two new team members came and left. And I worked out that in about 6 months, I had to onboard about 25 people at one point. And it was taking me about 8 hours per person of my time personally, excluding the other managers and team members need to be involved. And I transitioned to using content to train the team. I got that down to 1 hour per person. So, I saved hundreds of hours by quite literally capturing that process in a set of videos, putting it in our knowledge base, making sure the team, as they joined, went through that first before they spoke to anyone else. And so I knew that some of my best practice ideas would already be embedded in their minds before they had a chance to learn something from someone else that might not follow my process. So it saved significant amounts of time. And of course, I've moved on from that business, but I still get messages on LinkedIn from some of those team members that say, hey, thanks for the training, or, I'm learning this. Can you just clarify this point? And I left that business over a year ago. So it's particularly powerful for scaling and keeping that consistency. And just to iterate again on that point of the processes had to reflect how our team worked, not just how the leadership wanted to see the tasks, but actually what are the routines and the tools and things that the team actually wanted to use and did use, because we couldn't get adoption if it was a totally alien set of processes or steps. It needed to be something that reflected reality and they could see was adding value. So we did kind of start with looking at Carbon's processes to some extent, but actually said, look, how do we really want to do things?
Yeah. Perfect. And we got a question come in. Rowan's been busy answering questions in the background, but one here from Gur, who said, once the accountancy business has the processes determined, does that also determine the type of clients that you want to attract? Basically not serving those that will not fit into your process. So my answer to that, Go, is yes, absolutely, it does. And one of the things that Peter was touching on there for me is that if we as the accountants don't control the process, we can't control the profitability. So clearly we have to ensure that the clients that we take on are prepared to follow the processes that we put in place. And I often get firms kicking back on that. But if we think about the reality of it, our clients pay us to give them advice. So they're doing that because they think that we know best. So therefore, it shouldn't be difficult for us to say to a client, you should work this way because it's the best way. We're using our experience and expertise, and we know that this is the way to work, and you're going to get most value from us as an advisor. So we shouldn't be concerned about dictating process to clients, and it's the analogy of if you went to the doctors or the dentist and they said, I'm going to give you this treatment, the likelihood is you're not going to say, well, actually, you know what, I'd rather have this other one. We rely on them to give us the best advice, and we should be no different. That's my take on it. Peter J, any comments on that in terms of process, and does it determine the clients that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, we're very specific to the clients we work with, Will. We only work with small business owners who are going to use QuickBooks Online as the backbone of their financial system. Yep. So we're not interested in understanding 2 or 3 different bookkeeping systems. We're going to work with one, and we're going to become very, very good at that one. And then we're just going to offer that one to the clients that want that one system. Yep. So, controlling the bookkeeping system that the clients are going to use really allows you to streamline all the other processes forwards from there. Whereas if you are using lots of different bookkeeping systems, those processes get more varied as they go forwards. So yeah, I would say absolutely control everything about what the client's going to do. Like you said, we're the experts. The clients are coming to us asking for this information, so we may as well become the experts in a specific part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. We have 2 minutes to go. I think we had some key takeaways for you all. So first one from me really is this point about, if you have clarity around your systems and processes, that will deliver effective growth. If we ignore system and process, you might be able to grow, but you're not going to be able to scale, and that will hamper growth. So it's really important that we spend time getting this stuff right. How to prioritize your current processes for improvement and document their as-is status process maps. So look at what it is you're doing at the moment, understand where the opportunities are to work more effectively, where there's opportunities to improve those processes. Think about how you go about reducing unnecessary steps in your processes. And as Peter mentioned, automate where it makes sense. Don't automate for the sake of automation, because if it's already a rubbish process, then you're automating rubbish, and that's going to compound it and make it even more rubbish than it was before. And think about how you go about implementing changes to your workflow without disrupting what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. So Peter made the point about the importance of a clearly defined project for this stuff. So as an example to that, 5-6 years ago now, we moved 600 clients from cash flow to zero, and we did that in about 18 months. And as a project, it started really easy because we were doing all the easy wins, all the easy clients, the ones that we did internally. But then we started to stagnate because we didn't have a clearly defined project plan for it. So if you want to make real change and make it quickly and productively, you've got to plan it, and it's got to be considered and operated as a project. And a project is something that has a clearly defined outcome and deadline. So think about your process design work as a project, and make sure the resource is dedicated to it and the leadership is there, which is what Peter made the point of right at the beginning of his session. So that takes us to quarter two. We are bang on. So I really hope it's been useful for everybody. Thank you to both the Peters and the Carbon team and the App Advisory Plus team in the background that have pulled this all together. I hope it's been useful. We will share a recording together with the slides and any of the links that Peter's mentioned to you, so you get all of that in a follow-up email. Do let us have any feedback on today's session. We'd really appreciate that. But otherwise, thank you, Peter and Peter.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays, everybody. Hope it's been useful. Thank you for taking the time to join us, and we will see you all again very soon. Thanks so much indeed.
Cheers.